against law enforcement officers and submit them to Congress. Some of the components of these reports include the number of attacks intentionally targeting police officers, a description of the federal response on attacks against law enforcement officers, and recommendations for improving responses to attacks. Further, this legislation requires the Attorney General to submit to Congress a report that assesses the ability to implement a new category of reporting in the Uniform Online Reporting System and the National Incident-Based Reporting System, provides details on how to engage state and local law enforcement agencies in reporting the data as well as disparities, and offers additional legislative tools or authorities helpful in deferring aggregate actions. H.R. 2243, the bipartisan LEOSA Reform Act of 2024, amends Title 18 United States Code to improve the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act and provisions relating to the carrying of concealed weapons by law enforcement officers. This legislation provides necessary exemptions, clarifications, and certifications that would allow current and retired law enforcement officers certified under LEOSA to carry a concealed firearm on public transportation and within national parks, gun-free school zones, as well as certain federal facilities. By clarifying the rights of qualified current law enforcement officers as well as retired officers, this legislation will augment existing public safety postures in critical locations across our nation. To quote former Senator Barbara Boxer, quote, "Law enforcement officers are never off duty. They are dedicated public servants who are sworn to protect public safety at any time and place where peace is threatened. They need all the help they can get," end quote. Finally, H.R. 2255, the Federal Law Enforcement Officer Service Weapon Purchase Act of 2025, directs the Administrator of the General Services Administration, GSA, to establish a program to allow current and retired federal law enforcement officers to purchase a retired firearm from the agency that issued the firearm to that officer. Current law requires federal agencies to destroy retired firearms, a process that remains costly, and that cost is ultimately borne by hardworking taxpayers across the nation. By recovering these costs and allowing current and retired federal law enforcement officers who remain in good standing to purchase these firearms, this legislation achieves pertinent aims that benefit law enforcement and hardworking taxpayers. This week is National Police Week, and it's a perfect opportunity to advance these pieces of legislation that affirm our commitment to supporting the men and women of law enforcement. I invite our Democrat colleagues to join us in doing so. And before I yield to the ranking member, please wish Mr. Neguse a happy birthday when he comes in. Today's his birthday, and we're glad he has the gift of spending it with the Rules Committee.
Well, hopefully he's out drinking.
With that, I look forward to today's discussion. Now yield to Mr. McGovern for any comments he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And before I begin, I just want to thank you and all the members of this committee from the bottom of my heart for your prayers and gestures of kindness over the last few weeks. It means more to me and my family than you can imagine. So I appreciate, all the outreach. It was comforting. Madam Chair, I'm not going to get into the details of all the bills that we're considering today. I'll leave it to the panelists to go into details, but it is National Police Week, and I do want to express my deep disappointment that this House still has yet to properly acknowledge and honor those who defended our lives here on January 6th. I was in the chair that day. I took over for Speaker Pelosi. I was one of the last people off the House floor. I saw the attackers that day up close, and it was horrific. And Speaker Johnson, for whatever reason, refuses to put up a bronze plaque honoring the officers who defended this building that day. Congress passed a law in 2022 to put up a memorial. The plaque is already printed. It's just sitting somewhere on this campus ready to be installed. But the Speaker won't do it. And I guess my question is, why won't he do it? Can someone explain to me why a plaque that Congress voted to authorize, honoring the bravery of those officers that day, is still not on display? It really is a sign of disrespect, and it is a slap in the face to the Capitol Police who protect all of us each and every day. I think, we kind of can guess the answer, and I think it's because a lot of people, a lot of Republicans, not all, but many, want to downplay what happened that day. And to be clear, January 6th was a day where violent criminals broke into the Capitol, not political prisoners, as Trump likes to call them, or patriots. They were violent criminals. They brutally attacked our police, crushed officers in doorways, tased officers into cardiac arrest, and beat officers with anything they could get their hands on, including flagpoles, bats, and fire extinguishers. There are law enforcement officers outside of this room right now who were attacked that day and continue to protect this building and protect members of Congress. So all I will say to all of you is that if we're serious about Police Week and about honoring our police, you would tell Speaker Johnson to hang that plaque. You would say right here and now, in clear and unequivocal terms, that Donald Trump was wrong to pardon the January 6th criminals, and you would call that day what it was, a violent insurrection. I'm just, it's beyond disappointment. I'm outraged that we're even raising this issue after all this time. And so when people talk about honoring our police during Police Week, it rings a little hollow given that omission. Unfortunately, we're seeing, in addition to that, not recognizing the officers on January 6th, we have Republicans coming up with budgets that slash $680 million in funding for the ATF and for DEA and for FBI and the firing FBI employees, wiping out $1 billion in funding for community policing grants and gutting civil rights enforcement, all while handing tax cuts to billionaires. But if we want to celebrate and truly honor police during Police Week, we can start by telling the truth. And the truth is that the officers who protected the Capitol on January 6th are the heroes. They are the good guys, not the attackers, but the police who protected and saved countless lives on that day, and continue to do so. And I honor their service to us. And again, I think it would be a meaningful gesture and an acknowledgement that we all realize the seriousness of that day if we could finally put on display that plaque that Congress authorized. And with that, I thank the chair and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I now welcome our first panel, Representative Knott and Representative Raskin, and Ranking Member Raskin from the Committee on the Judiciary. Your full statement will be submitted for the record. We ask you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Representative Knott, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. As you well know, it is National Police Week. More than 60 years ago, President John F. Kennedy signed a proclamation designating May 15th as Peace Officers Memorial Day and reserved the full week to rightfully honor law enforcement. Thousands of law enforcement officers are visiting Washington, D.C. this week to honor their colleagues who have made the ultimate sacrifice while bravely and selflessly serving their communities in the line of duty. The 3 bills before us today will make communities safer, and more importantly, they will show our appreciation for the men and women of law enforcement. Allow me to first discuss H.R. 2243, the Leosa Reform Act. Briefly, in 2004, President George W. Bush signed into law the Law Enforcement Officers Safety Act. LEOSA exempts certain active and retired law enforcement officers carrying a LEOSA photographic identification card from state and local prohibitions on the carrying of concealed firearms. Since its original passage in 2004, LEOSA has been amended twice, in 2010 and then in 2013, to clarify who qualifies as an active or retired law enforcement officer. It also makes other small changes to the certification and compliance requirements for retired officers. The LEOSA Reform Act would make small but important changes to LEOSA to allow qualified, active, and retired officers to conceal carry in the same manner as many licensed citizens according to their state law. For example, the LEOSA Reform Act will allow law enforcement officers qualified under LEOSA to carry a firearm on public transportation, in national parks, in gun-free zones, and in certain publicly accessible federal facilities. We must permit our active and retired law enforcement officers the ability to protect themselves and others no matter where they are here in the United States. The second bill we are considering is H.R. 2240, the Improving Law Enforcement Officer Safety and Wellness Through Data Act. Police officers risk their lives every day to protect our communities. Unfortunately, they have faced an increase in unprovoked and ambush-style attacks in recent years. While the government collects basic information on these attacks, such as when the attack occurred and what types of weapons were used, more information is needed to help law enforcement officers prepare for, identify, and to prevent future anti-police violence. This bill would fill in the identified gaps in reporting requirements on attacks targeting our law enforcement officers, allowing federal, state, and local governments to equip police with the resources necessary to safely execute their jobs. The third and final bill is H.R. 2255, the Federal Law Enforcement Officer Service Weapon Purchase Act of 2025. Under current policy, federal agencies must destroy retired firearms with no fewer than 3 witnesses to the destruction. In 2022, the Fraternal Order of Police notified Congress of multiple federal law enforcement agencies replacing their service weapons. The replacement of these service weapons accounted for the destruction of approximately 20,000 firearms, costing the American taxpayers roughly $8 million. This legislation would save that cost for agencies and taxpayers while recouping part of the initial expense. Under this law, the administrator of the General Services would establish a program to allow current and retired federal law enforcement officers to purchase a retired firearm issued to them by their agency. To be eligible to participate, the officer must be in good standing with the agency, and any firearms sold through the program must be sold within 6 months of the firearm's retirement. And finally, the firearm must be sold for salvage value. American taxpayers should not have to pay for a service weapon twice, first when it is acquired, and then secondly when it is destroyed. Thank you, Madam Chair. I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Knott. Ranking Member Raskin.
Thank you, Madam
You're
Chairwoman.
recognized.
I appreciate it, Mr. Knott. And to the ranking member, I know how tough it is for you to be back now, but please know that you are surrounded by the love of your colleagues, you and your family. We honor the officers who've laid down their lives for their communities on Police Week, and we recognize the challenges that officers face as they make our communities safer. Our state and local officers work together with our federal. When the local officers trace a firearm, they turn to the ATF. When there's terrorism, they cooperate with the FBI. When they need funding to purchase life-saving equipment like bulletproof vests, they seek and obtain federal grants. When they find child abuse online, they report it to the federally funded Internet Crimes Against Children task forces. And when they respond to domestic violence, they often use the training provided by federal grants and place victims in federally funded shelters. But many of these resources have been severely cut already by Elon Musk, Doge, President Trump, and Republicans who refuse to intervene to stop it. The DOJ just terminated $500 million in grants to local police forces, victim services, juvenile justice and services, and other public safety mechanisms. We had an amendment to try to restore all of that funding, which our colleagues didn't verbally oppose, but they all voted against, unfortunately. But, Madam Chair, you can't back the blue while you're defunding and gutting essential law enforcement agencies and networks. Moreover, when police are violently attacked, wounded, maimed, and disfigured, as scores of officers were on January 6, 2021, Donald Trump and his administration are letting the criminals go free. Many of the beneficiaries of the pardons of more than 1,500 insurrectionists and rioters have already reoffended, have already been rearrested for crimes. Many have already been charged. This week, we should be restoring the grants that DOJ cut. We should be pushing the administration to release the funding that supports crucial programs like the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force program. We should be insisting, as the ranking member observed, that the plaque honoring our police officers in the Capitol be put up. It's more than a year late. That's the very least we can do for people who risked their lives, and some of them lost their lives, defending us against the savage attack on the Capitol. But instead, we have a reporting bill today, which collects data. We have no objection to that. And two bills that expand the ability of current and retired officers to buy more guns in more places. These two bills have big flaws. Even if they didn't, this package would be insulting in light of this administration's policies systematically undermining law enforcement and making the jobs of police officers harder. The LEOSA Reform Act would preempt state concealed carry laws, forcing all 50 states to allow off-duty and retired officers to carry concealed firearms on private property open to the public like restaurants, bars, parks, and playgrounds. It would require all states to allow off-duty and retired officers to carry concealed firearms on buses, trains, subways, and even in gun-free school zones. It would preempt laws passed by the states prohibiting high-capacity magazines. On top of all this, H.R. 2243 weakens training certification standards, which currently require training on an annual basis. That would be changed to every 3 years. We have dozens of proposals that we could be agreeing upon to make our communities safer without infringing on the rights of states at all, but this bill is not one of them, and we strongly oppose it. The Federal Law Enforcement Officer Service Weapon Purchase Act was once a sensible bipartisan bill led by our former colleague Val Demings. Her version allowed federal agencies to sell handguns no longer in use to active duty officers who previously carried them for their fair market value as long as they completed a background check, as with any other gun sale. We supported that bill. We had bipartisan support. Then Republicans weakened it by stripping the background check requirement. But they still limited the bill to handgun sales to current law enforcement officers. We accepted that weakened compromise, but we took it. But when the bill came to the floor last Congress, then our colleagues decorated it with a menagerie of extreme provisions. And that is the wild bill which is brought to us today. Now the bill makes it so an officer could retire, commit a crime, then as a criminal become a person who may not legally own firearms under federal law, and then buy from the federal government a semi-automatic assault weapon or a sawed-off shotgun, even a grenade launcher at a substantial discount on the fair market value without passing any background check at all. And that's just a bridge way too far for us. We can't accept that. We tried to offer common sense changes to reform and improve this extravagantly dangerous bill, but our friends rejected everything we offered. We could have passed a reasonable bipartisan bill, as we showed in the last Congress, but they didn't want to do that. Instead, we've got this very extreme version, and we cannot support that. So I hope we could work on legislation we work on together. We call on all our colleagues to stand with law enforcement in word and in deed by restoring critical grants that have been cut, by commemorating the bravery of our officers on January 6th, and ensuring that our federal agencies can continue to provide critical assistance to state and local law enforcement. With that, I yield back, Madam Chair, and I thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you very much. I yield to myself to ask questions, but before I do that, Mr. Neguse, we acknowledged today is your birthday when we began, so now we will acknowledge it again. So we're glad to have you. Well, we're glad to have you here on your birthday. Representative Knott, you worked as a federal prosecutor before coming to Congress and developed a strong relationship with our nation's law enforcement organizations. Can you tell us why law enforcement supports these pieces of legislation?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. You know, these bills are very simple in terms of the motivation behind them and the steps that they take legislatively. Starting with the LEOSA Reform Act, all this does is essentially close needless bureaucratic burdens on law enforcement, whether or not they're off-duty or retired in the carrying of their service weapon. As we alluded to on both Mr. Raskin and myself, law enforcement has faced an undue and a severe increase in attacks while they're on duty, while they're off duty, and even after they leave the service. And there is nothing in this law that allows them to maintain the rights to possess firearms if they break the law, if they're convicted of a certain crime, et cetera. But whether it is simply changing their addresses, whether it's a reporting requirement under LEOSA, it simply eases the bureaucratic burdens on their rights to carry a concealed weapon and protect themselves and their communities, as they do when they are in service behind a badge. In regards to the ability of law enforcement officers to purchase the firearms that are retired from service, again, law enforcement officers, whether they're federal, state, or local, are some of the finest people in our country. And law enforcement officers at every level undergo very rigorous background checks. They have to maintain very strict standards in how they utilize firearms and how they perform their duties with firearms and how they are able to proficiently use firearms even under duress. And this bill simply allows for the GSA to form a program for qualified officers to purchase their firearms when the firearm has been retired. Again, this is something that's important to law enforcement. Many law enforcement practice years with the same firearm. They become accustomed to it, how it feels, how it shoots. They become very familiar with it and are very proficient with it. So enabling them to take those firearms home after the service retires the gun, it's simply common sense and it's the right thing to do. In regards to hand grenades, bombs, or anything else that was alluded to by the previous statement, that is simply not true. First, those are not service weapons. The law requires or gives credence to the definition of a firearm. And again, the GSA is not going to be selling any type of outlandish weaponry under this program as the law does not allow it. So it's a common sense step to allow law enforcement officers to protect themselves once they leave the service. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying what Mr. Raskin said about sawed-off shotguns and hand grenades, because I was going to ask you about that, so I appreciate your clarifying that. But as you know, there's been an escalation of assaults on police officers, Congressman Knott. The rate of assaults on American law enforcement enforcement reached a 10-year high in 2023, according to the FBI's report from last year. Do you believe that these campaigns against law enforcement, whether it be by defund activists or rogue prosecutors that failed to uphold a plain reading of the law, have created a climate of mistrust in some of our communities? And could that play a part in causing some of the alarming patterns we're seeing?
Absolutely. You know, ever since I've come to Congress, Madam Chairwoman, the only crime that I've heard about from the other side of the aisle is January 6th, and it contradicts what they have said about local law enforcement for years. I was working with federal law enforcement when the BLM riots took the country by storm, when there were billions of dollars of property damage that many on the other side of the aisle encouraged. I worked with federal law enforcement when they were targeted specifically by elected leaders. And the systematic undoing of public trust in local law enforcement had a grave effect on men and women who worked behind the badge. And there is a very real distrust in communities all over the country as it relates to law enforcement that is incredibly dangerous. It's incredibly undermining to law enforcement. And even in this current state, when we have the previous administration who encouraged lawlessness at the border, who encouraged people from all over the world to come into this country regardless of their criminal intent, now that the current administration is trying to do something about that, there is a demonizing of the ICE agents and local law enforcement who are working to protect this country. So there is a very real sense of distrust, and it's imperative that we work together to stop that.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGovern, you're recognized.
Mr. Raskin, before I ask my question, do you want to respond to any of this?
Well, I think that some of the conversation proceeded on the basis of a confusion of the two bills. It is the second bill we're discussing today, which allows the purchase of semi-automatic weapons and grenade launchers. And if not, I'd be very happy if we could either correct that by amendment right now, or if people want to enter that in the record, because right now all it says is the only thing that you can't buy as a retired officer is a machine gun. But do you take it to include also the grenade launchers and the semi-automatics?
It makes it very clear in the law this is a service weapon, and there's a program that shall be established by the GSA to assign the appropriate service weapons that can be sold.
Right, but there's a categorical ban on the recovery, the purchase of machine guns. That is excluded by your legislation, but
Correct.
not excluded is semi-automatic weapons. But I understood the chair to be saying that she thought that it was excluded.
I did, and I believe Mr. Knott has said service weapon.
Yes.
Yes, but machine gun is not a service weapon, but it's one that would be within the arsenal of the police, which is why they textually excluded it. So if you think that we should exclude the semi-automatic weapons, I agree with you entirely, and I think we should add that by amendment now, and the grenade launchers as well, at the very least.
Let's Mr. Knott clarify.
But a semi-automatic weapon is, that's entirely too broad. Law enforcement carries semi-automatic weapons from the state, local, and federal level across every jurisdiction, whether it's a handgun or a semi-automatic rifle. That's the only type of firearm that they carry. So if we did that, if we adopt that amendment as broadly as Mr. Raskin states, it would essentially render the bill moot.
Mr. McGovern, it's your time.
Okay, oh, I forgot. I thought you had it. All right, okay. Mr. Raskin, last month, President Trump's Department of Justice suddenly cut hundreds of millions of dollars in grant funding that supports law enforcement, crime prevention, and public safety programs from across the country. What is better for protecting people? What is better in terms of honoring our officers? Reversing that, or passing the bills that we're dealing with here today?
Oh, I mean, there's no contest there. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that go into local law enforcement, assistance to victims of rape, sexual assault. And when we raised this at the Judiciary Committee, not only could we not find a single member who would speak for these terrible cuts made apparently by one employee of DOJ, we couldn't even find anybody who knew anything about it. And yet our colleagues, although they wouldn't speak up in defense of those cuts, they all voted against our amendment to restore the money. So that is a very serious problem. I mean, this stuff we're talking about is minuscule in terms of its effect. It moves us basically in the wrong direction, but
And we've kind of done this before, I think. I mean, similar bills in the past.
Yeah, there seems to be a performative dimension to the whole thing. But I would simply say the first bill that we talked about is a major incursion on the prerogatives of state governments. If a state government wants to have a gun-free school zone, if it wants to say no guns on public buses or trains or subways, why shouldn't they be able to do that without being overridden by this legislation? And, you know, as to the other one, again, we pretty much had a compromise for that last year and the year before, but it's been riddled with all these riders, so it gets to the point where now it would say that an officer could retire, commit a crime, and then as a criminal become a person who is not legally eligible to own firearms, but then buy from the government a gun. including an assault rifle, as we just clarified, and as Mr. Not defended that, at a substantial discount without any background check at all. And that's not searching for any kind of common ground, as small as this issue is. I mean, I'd much prefer if we were working on what 90% of the American people support, which is a universal violent criminal background check on all gun sales. And this is something that moves us measurably in the wrong direction here.
Mr. Nadi, are you at all bothered by the fact that a bronze plaque honoring the officers who defended this Capitol on January 6th is that Congress authorized is not being displayed? Does that bother you at all?
Mr. McGovern, I wasn't here on January 6th.
Well,
I am here to talk about these three bills.
Yeah. Well,
And this is obviously the Speaker's prerogative. He's making his decisions accordingly.
Well, this is Police Week,
It is.
all right, and we're supposed to honor our police. Do you believe the Capitol Police should be honored at all?
I do believe that the Capitol Police are wonderful folks. What I
you don't
completely
believe they should be
disagree
honored?
with is the undermining of local police all over this country.
So
The only
you
police
don't believe they should be honored?
that the Democratic Party seems to be focused on
I'm just
honoring
asking you a
are
question
DC
about-
police.
We passed a bill in Congress that, among other things, authorized the creation of a plaque honoring the men and women who defended this Capitol on January 6th, who protected the lives of members and staff that day. We did that, and it is done. And yet, we can't get an answer as to why it is.
That's the Speaker's
that-
prerogative, sir. That's the
Well,
Speaker's prerogative.
It's the law. It's the law. And my question to you is, as a member of Congress, and as a Republican member of Congress, can you please ask the Speaker, why the hell hasn't he hung that plaque up to honor the men and women who defended this campus on that day? I mean, I find it offensive. Every chance I get, I thank the men and women who protect this building. And I was the last person off the House floor. I saw them coming through into the Speaker's gallery, smashing windows, banging, hitting the police who were there to defend all of us. I think since it's Police Week and we're talking about, again, it's Police Week, and yet the Trump administration is proposing cutting, hundreds of millions of dollars and police funding, which is one thing. But I mean, can we all agree that we should do what Congress, voted to do? Mr. Raskin?
But one significant correction I would make to what my friend from the Judiciary Committee said is this: it wasn't just DC local police. There were at least 50 officers from my county, Montgomery County, who came down and joined the front lines of that struggle. There were police from Prince George's County, and there were lots of police who came from the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Absolutely.
And there were police officers who came just because they heard what was going on the radio or on TV, and they came down. Like Officer Michael Fanone, who had a heart attack and begged for his life, saying, "I have 4 daughters," and thought that he was basically breathing his last breaths on that day. So the bravery and the valor are not just with the Capitol Police and not just with the DC Police, as brave and as valiant as they were on that day. But I think your point seems elementary to me, Mr. McGovern. You could think that's the greatest bill in the world to set up the plaque. You could think it's the dumbest thing in the world. You could love what the officers did, or you could think that it's been exaggerated and blown up for political reasons, as some of our colleagues seem to think. Whatever you think of it, it is the law. That was supposed to have been put up a year ago. You want to repeal the law, repeal the law. Otherwise, put up the plaque and let's honor the officers.
And thank you for correcting the record, because all of those officers, all of those police officers are honored in this plaque. They're all recognized in this plaque. I know this is an easy question, in my opinion. This should be yes, we should hang it up. Yes, it should be put up, immediately. And yet it's like you can't get a straight answer from anybody on that. And again, we're going to keep on raising it. Again, it is the law, and I want to know why the hell the Speaker of the House won't put it on display. I think that is a sign of disrespect to men and women in law enforcement. And it's something that could be easily remedied. And I don't understand, what is the hesitation? What is the why is this such a big deal? I have my theories, which I won't get into, but it would be nice if we could say during Police Week that we are honoring the police officers who protected this Capitol, the members and the staff, and everybody who was here that day. Yeah, Mr.
I think it would be the appropriate thing to do. It is what democratic governments do to honor the people who have fought to defend them, whether it's abroad or at home, against enemies, foreign or domestic. And not to do it would suggest that we're moving into some kind of authoritarianism where we compel historic amnesia about significant public events in order to rewrite them. And that's really not the direction I think America should be going in.
Unfortunately, we're getting too used to to accepting a president who ignores the law and who ignores Congress, and now we're accepting a Speaker of the House who is ignoring the laws that Congress passed. I thank the chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've listened to this for a while, and, you know, a machine gun has a select fire switch. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is that correct, Mr. Raskin?
Wait, but I'm not sure I understood the language. I don't know
A
machine gun.
machine gun, by definition, has a select fire switch. Is
Yes,
that correct?
yes.
It does?
Yes.
So it's not a semi-automatic weapon, it's a fully automatic weapon. That is the reason for the select fire switch, correct?
As I understand it, I defer to your expertise.
Okay. Well, it's correct. It has a select fire switch. So this intentional confusion of semi-automatic with machine gun is a little disingenuous at best.
I didn't mean-
A machine gun, by definition, is a fully automatic weapon. It has a select fire switch, which means if you pull the trigger one time, it will fire multiple rounds. That is by definition a machine gun. It is not a semi-automatic weapon. A machine gun is a fully automatic weapon.
But I did not mean to conflate them or to mislead you in any way. I was talking about the bill, because the bill's language defines a firearm as any firearm except for machine guns. And so the chair and I shared the same confusion, because it seemed as if Mr. Knott was saying that a semi-automatic weapon could not be accessed under this bill, but it could be. And so it had nothing to do.
The majority of the weapons, the service weapons that a law enforcement officer carries is going to be a semi-automatic weapon, not a machine gun. And so there's some.
Exactly right. We all agree machine guns are excluded explicitly in the language of the bill.
All right, we could be here all night arguing about this. The definition of a machine gun, it has a select fire switch, it is fully automatic, not a semi-automatic weapon. But I want to point out, and just correct me if I'm wrong on this, Mr. Knott, but the legislation says a federal law enforcement officer, which means they're going to be a certified law enforcement officer, correct?
That's correct.
That's correct, okay. May purchase a retired firearm under Section AF if, two requirements, the purchase is made during the 6-month period beginning on the date the firearm was so retired,
That's correct.
and, not or, and with respect to such purchase, the officer is in good standing, so the officer is in good standing with the federal agency that employs or employed such officer.
That's correct. Nothing in this bill, as was alluded to, preempts existing law that would preclude possession of a firearm. And Mr. Scott, you hit the correct point on that second subsection, that the officer must be, or the agent must be, in good standing within the agency from which he is retiring to buy the firearm.
So this is not somebody who at one point was a certified peace officer who conducted bad faith and had their peace officer standards.
And there's a second layer of protection here. Again, when you look at Section A of this measure, the GSA is tasked with developing a program.
That's right.
So hypothetically, even if someone is under arrest yet to be convicted of something, number one, they wouldn't be in good standing, as you allude to. They'd be placed on some type of leave or administratively paused. But the administrative services or the general services could further protect from this scare tactic that the other side is painting.
Well, I just want to, if anybody's watching this, make sure that they understand that the officer must be in good standing with the agency. And with that, I yield.
That's correct.
Do you yield, Mr. Scott? Okay, thank you. Mr. Norman, you're recognized. I'm sorry, Ms. Scanlon, I apologize.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we've mentioned, it's Police Week on Capitol Hill, and I would hope that we can all agree that Congress should honor our frontline public servants in law enforcement and also do more to make our communities safer and ensure that members of the law enforcement community are able to carry out their duties safely and to prevent and respond to crime effectively. We should be able to agree that this would be a good time to put forward bipartisan, common-sense solutions to achieve these goals. But as Mr. Raskin has already described, the bills before us have been altered from their prior bipartisan versions, and the bills before us this week seem to miss the mark. Regardless of whatever other goals they might have, the versions before us would undermine public safety and put more guns on our streets with fewer protections to ensure responsible and safe use. Police officers know that more guns on our streets make their jobs more dangerous and our communities less safe. These bills would allow off-duty and retired police officers to bring guns into schools and onto playgrounds. It would allow former officers to bring weapons nearly anywhere, infringing on the rights of individual states to regulate their public spaces and raising the possibility of a tragic, fatal encounter. What we should be doing is passing legislation to require universal background checks, to make sure that those who are a danger to themselves or others don't have access to firearms, to ensure that common sense gun safety laws are not undermined by exceptions that put law enforcement or others at risk, and to keep guns out of the hands of those seeking to commit senseless acts of violence, including by regulating ghost guns, probably the #1 thing I hear in every meeting with our law enforcement across my community. We should also refocus on legislation that actually supports police officers, not just give them the ability to buy back service weapons. Legislation like the Honoring Our Fallen Heroes Act that would expand the Public Safety Officers Benefits Program to cover service-related cancers. Just last month, we witnessed the tragic passing of a police officer from California who developed melanoma after years of sun exposure in the line of duty. But because of the gap in the public safety officers' benefits coverage, his family will not qualify for those benefits. There are countless cases like this, and the surviving families of these officers deserve to receive those benefits. This is the kind of legislation we should be working on. And one more thing, I share my colleagues' frustration that while our Republican colleagues make a show of support for the police, they've consistently turned their backs on the Capitol Police and the others who responded to the January 6th riots. They've denied the seriousness of that day, refusing to acknowledge the trauma the attack on our Capitol had on our nation, and in particular on the brave members of the Capitol and Metropolitan Police and other forces, hundreds of whom were injured and several of whom lost their lives as a result of that violent mob that stormed the Capitol. For years, Republicans have refused to comply with a duly enacted federal law requiring the installation of a plaque honoring the police for their sacrifices on that day. The plaque was required to be installed by March 2023, 2 years ago. The plaque has been delivered, but by all reports, its installation has been blocked by the Speaker. Not his prerogative, it's the law. This is disgraceful. It is a slap in the face to the Capitol Police and other law enforcement. It's an insult to the families of those who died in the wake of January 6th. So, since this is Police Week, I would urge the Speaker and our colleagues to do more than provide lip service to honoring the brave men and women in law enforcement who protect and defend this Capitol and our communities, and to actually honor them with action, starting with installation of the plaque to honor the police officers here. Mr. Raskin, you did mention the illegal impoundment of congressionally authorized funds to fight and prevent crime. One of the figures I saw was over 300 criminal justice grants totaling $811 million in funding, including for victim services, for crime prevention, for law enforcement. And we've also seen egregious firings and cuts to the Department of Justice, proposals to cut Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms by 25%. How is this going to impact law enforcement, safety, and safety in our communities?
Well, I've heard from a bunch of law enforcement entities, both in Maryland but in other parts of the country, that this is going to be crippling to them. I've heard from organizations that work with the victims of rape and sexual assault who say that they may have to close up shop because they were depending on it. This was money that was appropriated on a bipartisan basis by Congress. It was programmed by the Department of Justice, and it was awarded to these entities. And then, as far as I can tell, but I would love it if somebody could tell me more about what happened, but from what I can tell, one person in DOJ decided to slash all of those programs and get rid of them. One unelected junior person who had worked at Tesla and had worked for Elon Musk and then found his way into DOJ and decided to just destroy and vanquish all of the funding for those programs. That's a really serious problem for us, and it's a serious problem to our form of government because it's happening across the board. Now, there was a federal district court opinion out of California on Friday night which said that all of that is illegal, that's like a fourth branch of government which has decided to gut federal agencies and wipe out federal appropriations. There are now, I think, more than 150 temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions against this lawlessness, but we're struggling to catch up, and Congress cannot remain silent and just say, we'll let the courts do their job. We've got to do our job too.
And because Congress, of course, could quickly put an end to the DOJ tactics if it chose to act, if it had the political will.
It's an insult to us. We are the appropriating branch. We have the power of the purse. And it's very clear the executive branch cannot impound, it cannot redirect, it cannot divert, it cannot thwart the purposes of Congress. An Appropriations Act is a federal law, just like a law saying you can't violently attack Capitol Police officers or federal officers.
You know, in addition to the funding for victim services, funding for law enforcement, for crime prevention, I'm really concerned about the cuts to funding to address opioid use and abuse and fentanyl abuse. We've seen multiple grants in the region that I represent being cut. So we're seeing, just at a time when there's so much attention to the fact that we have to tackle this opioid crisis, some of the really great programs that were dealing with the demand side of that crisis have been cut.
It's a massive problem. There were a bunch of opioid projects that were cut out and other kinds of substance abuse projects that were cut out. You make another important point, and this requires more investigation, but when we look at the projects that were cut, they were disproportionately, not exclusively, but disproportionately in blue states or blue areas. And when we look at some of the ones that were restored by somebody getting in touch with the administration or getting in touch with Elon Musk, that also had a significant political valence to it. That cannot be the way that the United States operates a modern democratic government. That's how a tin pot dictatorship operates, which is you have a nationwide program, then you basically gut it, but then the people who are on your team get their funds back. That's not going to work for the United States of America, and I would hope people across the aisle would denounce that. It shouldn't be that if you have a phone number of somebody who can get in touch with Elon Musk, that you can be treated fairly and everybody else is just thrown to the wolves.
I guess it isn't fair if everyone else gets thrown to the wolves, and that is why we keep stressing the importance of the rule of law, that there are standards, that they're fair, that everyone has to live by them, and that you don't get things for your community just because of corruption or cronyism. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Now, Mr. Norman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You know, I think it's interesting, my friends on the left keep talking about January 6th. You know, what about the 50 cities that got destroyed with no consequences when you had the sitting vice president put up bond money? What about the illegals in this country? We just had in South Carolina 2 days ago a mother driving a car on a back road, got run off the road by 3 illegals, killed. The mother will not go home to her children. You talk about the opium crisis. What about those coming across the border that brought the fentanyl? Is that not lip service? That's what this president is doing is great. That's what Elon Musk is doing, is identifying the waste, fraud, and abuse. And you can say it's a dictatorship, but American people are thirsty to know where their tax dollars are. And law enforcement, you know, I thank you for bringing these and talk about these bills, Brad, because Law enforcement, they don't do it because of the money.
No.
They do it because it's a service.
That's right.
On the reporting to Congress, is there some teeth to be able to do something with that once we get the facts?
That'll probably come in a subsequent piece. Right now, the aim of this bill is to strictly gather data in a cohesive and unified way that the Department of Justice will undertake. And once that data is collected, then perhaps a subsequent follow-up allocation could be passed by Congress. But right now, the data is very localized. It's very spread out around the country. And Mr. Moore's bill here, it does seek to aggregate that, led by the Attorney General, so that the data can be set in the Department of Justice before the teeth are given to it.
And these bills also let a retired police officer buy a gun from a federal agency, which I guess previously they'd been destroyed.
That's right.
Buy a gun and then help protect the school children. And out of the schools that I talk with, protection, that a lot of the times the local authorities don't have the manpower to do it. So
That's right.
I think it's a great.
Yeah, the issues that we're hearing, it's not necessarily at all about public safety. And I would remind this committee that law enforcement is endorsing these three bills. And the idea that uniformly more guns is a bad thing is not supported by law enforcement. Criminals having guns is a bad thing, but law enforcement officers carrying a firearm in no way makes anyone less safe.
Right. Guns don't shoot people by themselves, do they? I mean, they can't jump up and kill anybody, so it's really people.
That's right.
Okay, thank you for presenting this, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Norman. Mr. Neguse, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member Raskin and Mr. Knott. Nice to meet you.
Happy birthday.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Getting so many birthday salutations. I appreciate that. I guess I want to start on the point that my good friend from South Carolina referenced and around some of the challenges that we face as a country and in ways that I think the Congress ought to step in to address some of these challenges. One bill in particular, H.R. 2240, so this is the reporting bill, Mr. Knott, you'll see on the third page in the findings section, subparagraph 5, I'll just read it here, it says, and I'll quote, "A data collection that represents the full circumstances surrounding violent attacks and ambush attacks on law enforcement officers is vital for the provision of needed federal resources to federal, state, and local law enforcement officers." Do you see that language?
I did.
All right. And I presume you agree with that.
Sure.
And I certainly agree with that as well. Have Republicans in the 119th Congress passed any legislation to support or increase funding for local law enforcement?
To this point, I don't believe so.
Have Republicans in the 119th Congress passed any legislation to support or increase funding for state law enforcement?
To this point, I don't believe we have, no.
Have Republicans in the 119th Congress passed any legislation to increase funding for federal law enforcement?
Reallocated, but increased, no.
Yeah, no increases.
Yes.
Right? So no increases for the FBI, no increases for federal law enforcement, no increases for state law enforcement, no increases for local law enforcement in Colorado or North Carolina, of course, the state that you serve. This is Police Week. I think we should be supporting local law enforcement. I think we should be supporting state law enforcement. I think we should be supporting federal law enforcement. I wish Republicans in Congress would have brought to this committee and to the full body some legislation that would increase resources for local, state, and federal law enforcement. But regrettably, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have failed to do so. It's about midway through the first year of the 119th Congress, or the session of Congress, I should say. If anything, I think, as you're probably aware, Mr. Knott, the administration has done the exact opposite, right? So they have decreased funding for local law enforcement and state law enforcement, which I suspect you're aware of.
Well, they have decreased the amount of money that's going to Washington, D.C. The amount of dollars that are going out into the states is actually forecasted to increase. For instance, the FBI, I believe it's roughly 30 to 40% of FBI dollars are concentrated in Washington, D.C. And Director Patel, the president, they are hoping that those dollars will go out into the
Well,
communities.
let's unpack. I've got some questions about the FBI in particular, around, just given your prior experience as a former federal prosecutor.
Sure.
So, but before we get to that.
But getting out of Washington is a
And I hear
priority.
you. Let me start with the state and local law enforcement piece, because I want to make sure I understand this right. So you're aware, earlier this year, this is just about 6 weeks ago, the Trump administration terminated 373 grants, law enforcement grants. This totals about $800 million worth of funding. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with a program called the Rural Violent Crime Reduction Initiative?
The specifics of it, I'm not.
Okay.
No.
So the Rural Violent Crime Reduction Initiative funds intermediary organizations that deliver financial assistance directly to dozens of rural law enforcement agencies across the country, North Carolina, Colorado. This is a program that the Trump administration ended. Were you aware of that?
Well, they rescinded the grant.
They
Yes.
rescinded the grant, correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. And you're comfortable with that?
Well, if there's duplicative dollars, if there's bureaucratic measures, if there's wasteful spending, then
Is it
absolutely.
your view that funding to rural law enforcement agencies, so these are sheriff's departments in my state or your state, are duplicative?
Well, I would have to look at the specifics of that particular grant.
Okay.
But I do know that I have spoken with law enforcement, and oftentimes a federal grant comes with more strings than they can count. And the bureaucratic cuffs that are on those from Washington, especially over the last few years, has been so paralyzing that they couldn't actually
I will
use
say
them.
that the law enforcement in your state respectfully seems to have a different view than the law enforcement that I visited with in my state. These are rural sheriffs, rural counties that have benefited from programs like this that help law enforcement, frontline police officers, and sheriff's deputies doing their job every day.
We all
And-
support-
Sir, let me finish.
Well,
And
we all
so,
support local law enforcement.
I hear you. I'm not accusing you of not.
Yes.
I'm just simply saying you said that it sounds like, and again, I'm not going to restate your testimony, based on your conversations in your jurisdiction, that
Yes.
some of them believe it's duplicative or there are too many conditions and so forth. I'm simply saying in my state, in the law enforcement that I've visited with, they are very concerned that a rural law enforcement initiative funded by Republican and Democratic administrations for years has now been unceremoniously terminated by the Trump administration. And to them and to me and to my constituents, that's not supportive of law enforcement. But I'll give you another example. This is a program. It's called the Officer Robert Wilson III Preventing Violence Against Law Enforcement Officers and Ensuring Officer Resilience and Survivability Initiative, otherwise known as the Valor Initiative. This is a program designed to improve safety and wellness of law enforcement officers across the country. It's been in existence for 15 years. That includes the first Trump administration, includes the Obama administration, includes the Biden administration. This is a grant program that is designed to prevent suicide prevention among law enforcement officers.
Yep.
The Trump administration terminated it. You're aware of that?
I am.
And you're comfortable with that termination?
Again, the specifics of that grant I'll have to do a deeper dive into, and someone in the administration would probably be better able to explain why they did that. But I do know that there, as you were well aware, there is duplicative spending, there is wasteful spending, and if rescinding some dollars so that they can better appropriate, write a better grant, if they can have a program that more efficiently designates dollars to those specific needs, that's a worthwhile undertaking.
Well,
no one is for increasing a suicide rate, obviously.
No one's accusing you of that, Mr. Knott.
Sure,
And I was
sure.
very careful not to do that, obviously.
Yes.
What I'm suggesting to you, and I hear you, I'm not, as you said, obviously asking these questions of an OMB official and of the administration officials is something I think the Appropriations Committee will certainly do. I'm
Yes.
just simply suggesting to you, $800 million.
Yes.
Almost $1 billion in local law enforcement grants. And I'm not going to go through each line by line with you.
Yes.
But it feels like the same response I'm getting from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle as I walk through these terminations of grant programs that go to local law enforcement is the same answer that, well, these may be duplicative, they may be repetitive or bureaucratic and all the like. Again, I will just simply tell you, real consequences
Sure.
for local police departments and local sheriffs in rural parts of our country, including the areas that I represent and many of the areas that my colleagues represent. And I think this is not a prudent or sensical approach for the Trump administration to take. And the fact that I can't find, I guess, any of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to take issue with these rescissions, particularly during Police Week, I think is regrettable. But Mr. Raskin has been wanting to jump in here, so I'm
May
going
I
to come
respond
back.
briefly? May I respond briefly?
Sure, go ahead.
If I may respond, just we as a party, we as a Congress, we must support local law enforcement. We are dependent upon local law enforcement at every level. And this administration, despite the snippet that you just gave, supports local law enforcement and
This is the
federal law
snippet,
enforcement.
but go ahead. This
And
isn't a snippet. I mean, sir, that was not.
there is one party that has advocated very consistently, with the exception of January 6th, at defunding local law enforcement. That is not this administration, it's not the Republican Party. And so I think all of us would do better to get together and to collectively determine how we can best serve all of law enforcement, and I'm willing to do that at any time.
And I appreciate the exchange and, you know, the back and forth, and I would simply say, first, not a snippet, what I was describing to you, and we can go through line by line, but the chairwoman has indulged me, you know, and so I don't want to abuse her generosity in terms of the time that I will take during my questioning, but nearly $1 billion in over 300 grants to local law enforcement, in my view, not a snippet. Secondly, I would just say—
Well, far more of that, far
Sir,
more than
sir,
$800
I
million
let you
was
finish.
cut
Let me
following the George Floyd riots
Sir,
at a
let
local
me finish
level.
my statements.
Far more.
Again.
Yes, sir.
I wasn't asking you a question. So I will just also say, this is a statement. The fact that Republicans, as you testified at the outset, have not brought a single bill to the floor for consideration to increase support for local, state, or federal law enforcement, and the fact that that has happened simultaneously to an administration that is gutting grants to local law enforcement, does not suggest to me a position that is supportive of local and state law enforcement. I am here telling you, as a member of the committee that we both serve on, the Judiciary Committee, I am eager
Yes.
to increase funding for local and state law enforcement. I've introduced a bill, the Project Safe Neighborhoods Reauthorization Bill. It's probably a program you're familiar with, given your years as a prosecutor.
I look forward to looking at it, yes.
And that's a program that the Trump administration has unfortunately gutted, but it's an example of an effort that I think is worth pursuing. Mr. Raskin, I apologize. I've neglected to give you an opportunity to opine here on this as well.
No, thank you very much, Mr.
Ranking
Nagus.
Member Raskin.
Just a couple of points here. The first point we need to make is that while our colleagues hypothesize a whole bunch of different potential justifications for these cuts, fortunately, that's not how the U.S. government usually works, right? We have appropriations committees in Congress. We have a Judiciary Committee, which I'm delighted to say Mr. Knott serves on now. We're able to oversee all of this stuff, right? And we appropriated that money. That went through the House, it went through the Senate, it was signed by the President, it went to the Department of Justice, it was programmed, and it was allocated, and it was awarded to all of these different entities, and something happened. And what happened was something called DOGE, which my constituents call dissing our government employees, or deranged oligarchs grabbing everything. But in any event, this unauthorized federal agency or department, one person went and just smashed all of that, just broke it apart. I wrote a letter, a totally good faith letter to the Attorney General saying, can you tell us what happened? Because I'm being besieged by requests from around the country saying, what happened to our grant? Where is our grant for our local police department? Where is our grant for our local opioid deterrence agency? Where are the grants? And I couldn't get an answer from the Department of Justice. Where is the accountability? Where is the transparency? Where's the democratic representativeness in that? Well, you say, Mr. Nagus, that or you were able to elicit the testimony from my friend that they've not introduced any money to introduced any legislation to increase money to local police departments. I would be a slightly bit more impolite. The president introduced the 2026 budget, which, as far as I can tell, an overwhelming number of our colleagues on the Republican side are supporting, which would cut $1 billion out of 40 Department of Justice grant programs which support police departments to reduce violent crime, hate crime, and crime against women, sexual assault. $1 billion, and they're about to go along with that. That's just formalizing what has just happened by DOGE with Elon Musk's chainsaw that they've done somehow in the thick of night without our witness. So I think that supporting the police has got to be something more than rhetorical. It's got to be programmatic and budgetary, and it's got to be smart. And so I take your point, Mr. Nagus. I yield back to you.
I thank the ranking member. I'm going to give you an opportunity, except I got a question around the FBI. I thank the ranking member. I couldn't agree with you more. And Mr. Knott, this goes to the exchange we were having earlier regarding the president's quote-unquote skinny budget for fiscal year 2026 and what I would describe as staggering cuts to law enforcement, including $545 million from the FBI. And why don't I give you first an opportunity, because I think it sounded like you had an explanation you wanted to provide regarding the cuts to the FBI, and then I can.
Well, I was just going to correct the record. I believe that in the submission that we made for the reconciliation package, there were increases to various law enforcement departments, specifically the Border Patrol, ICE, et cetera, to deal with the immigration crisis.
Mr. Knott, before we get to the FBI, I hear you.
I did-
Do we have to go through the exercise again about, so I ask you whether or not there's any legislation supporting local increase? I mean, I get it. I hear what you're saying about border security, but let's draw out the distinction here. I asked you a very specific series of questions around supporting local sheriffs, local police officers in North Carolina, state police in North Carolina, state police in Colorado, federal law enforcement such as the FBI or the ATF. We both agree that Republicans haven't proposed any bills to increase funding for those agencies, right?
Well,
that isn't up for debate.
I misheard. I thought I was under the assumption that you asked if we had passed any. We have not passed any. In our submissions last week in the committee, I believe there were increases to various portions of federal law enforcement.
You're referencing ICE,
Yes.
CBP, and I
Yes.
hear you, and I understand the argument you're making, but let's draw the distinction here. That's not the question I was asking, about local law enforcement, state law enforcement, or federal FBI, ATF. I understand
Sure.
your point about
Sure.
border. Now, with respect to the FBI,
Yes.
you go ahead if you'd like. I guess the question I have is about the $545 million of cuts.
Yes.
So my understanding is, according to the director of the FBI's testimony in front of the Senate, that's going to, at a minimum, result in 1,300 people being fired, laid off from the FBI. You worked closely,
I did.
I presume, with folks in the FBI as a AUSA for many years.
Yes.
I guess I'm just asking if maybe you could level with the committee and we could just kind of honestly talk about the fact that that is not a prudent way for us to achieve security on behalf of the citizens of our country, to cut 1,300 people from the FBI. Do you disagree with me on that?
Well, I do. I mean, it's a very broad question, but I will say, in my experience working with all law enforcement, local, state, and federal, some of those departments had excellent officers, deputies, and agents, and some of them had agents and officers that were not excellent. There were some people that were deservedly let go or should have been let go. Some served the taxpayers with unbelievable distinction and bravery. The amount of cases that they were able to carry and promulgate and see all the way through to a sentencing was astounding. And then there were some agents or deputies or policemen, et cetera, who did very little. And I do know that this administration is focusing on promoting and strengthening the agents who are productive, especially those in the field. And with the FBI, again, there is a disproportionate number of agents who are in Washington, D.C., and taking them from Washington and putting them out into the field so that they can do traditional police work. That is a priority.
And
it's one that I support.
And I hear you. And
Yes.
Mr. Knott, I guess what I would just suggest to you is what you've just described
Yes.
is very different than taking a sledgehammer to the FBI and unceremoniously terminating 1,300 people, not based on performance, which is precisely what will happen if these cuts that President Trump has proposed materialize. And I guess the reason why I'm passionate about this, and I suspect that you would be too as a former prosecutor, is that I don't think there's a universe in which there are going to be field special agents in North Carolina who aren't terminated as a result of this budget, if this budget is ultimately approved by Republicans in Congress. And the same will go in Colorado. That's very different than what you've described conceptually. And so I would just hope that those of my colleagues in law enforcement would be willing to step forward and say, listen, this is a bridge too far. And that's what I was hoping I would perhaps
Well, many of the agents
it sounds like I'm not going to get
Well,
there.
many of the agents that I worked with for years support the efforts of the president to clean up law enforcement and to de-bureaucratize law enforcement. I mean, the FBI especially does have a very tangled web of bureaucracy. And, streamlining it, better rewarding the agents who act with distinction.
I hear you.
That's a worthwhile
The
goal.
chairwoman's been very patient. I have two final questions, just two.
Two final questions.
Two final questions.
Well, they better
Two.
be quick.
Well, that depends on the answers, Madam
Okay,
Chair, but
quick answer.
Yes.
As a federal prosecutor, I suspect that you worked on cases involving prosecutions of individuals who had assaulted federal law enforcement. Is that true?
Yes.
Questions?
Okay. That was question one. Question two is, there were several people, several individuals, felons, who were convicted of assaulting police officers, resisting arrest. These are individuals from North Carolina. Two individuals in particular, one from Conover, one from Fort Bragg, a felony assault, resisting
Where was the
impeding-
first place you said?
What was that?
What was the first place that you said? I'm sorry.
Conover.
Okay.
Yeah, Conover, North Carolina, an individual who was sentenced to 41 months in prison for felony assault, resisting impeding officers, felony obstruction of official proceedings related to January 6th. A second individual, felony assault, resisting and impeding certain officers. He was sentenced to 44 months. Both of these felons from North Carolina were pardoned by President Trump. Do you agree with those pardons?
You know, on a broad level, I believe that
you can't say
anyone
no?
I believe that anyone commits a crime should be punished appropriately. And the president, it's his prerogative to pardon. He campaigned on it, and he did exactly what he said he would do after he was voted into office. But I'll reiterate, I do regret that the contempt for crime and support for police is limited to January 6th. And if this passion was spread throughout the country, we would not have the crime problems in every corner that we have
Mr. Knott,
currently.
it was so easy. It's just so easy to say, you know what? I disagree with those two pardons. The individuals attacked police officers. They're felons. They shouldn't have been pardoned. But you have a different view. I yield back. Thank you.
Getting into the issue of pardons is probably not something your side wants to do. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, you know, as somebody who represents a rural district, I can speak firsthand that as a Democrat, I have supported, and I am incredibly grateful for the incredible work my sheriffs do, my city police do, the tribal law enforcement does, but they also rely on the FBI. They rely on these federal grants. And in fact, they are not duplicative in my district. In my district, they are so hungry for assistance that if I went back and I told them that members of Congress are saying that you really shouldn't get these grants because they're duplicative or maybe they're wasteful, they would look at the state of their cars, which can't keep up, which is why me and my fellow Democrats have actually done a lot in terms of increasing support, increasing funding for law enforcement when we were in charge. And in fact, I have taken a lot of community projects to the sheriffs as a Democrat. So I actually take umbrage when I hear that somebody's saying Democrats don't support law enforcement, because we have shown it, not just by talking about it, but by actually funding those programs. And Ranking Member Raskin, when we saw the Dodgy Committee in my area, we talk about it as being a dodgy committee because it just seems to dodge any kind of oversight. It's very not transparent. Who knows what it's doing? When we saw them firing people, were they based on sort of reviews and performance reviews, or they seem to be sort of across the board? Nobody ever looked at what anybody did, because it was just somebody from Tesla just firing everybody with mass emails. Is that correct?
Well, this is why the administration has been struck down by judges across the country in pretty much the majority of the federal circuits, in dozens of different courts, and by Republican presidential appointees and Democratic presidential appointees. You know, the one that they're very angry at here in Washington, Judge Boasberg, was a Bush appointee. People are calling for his impeachment because he wants to hold the administration in contempt for deliberately defying the orders of a federal court. But there was a decision on Friday from the Northern District of California finding that DOJ was basically an illegal operation. And to your point, they are completely overriding civil service protections. The whole point of the civil service is you can't be fired for political reasons. You can't be fired for partisan
So when
reasons.
we go back to the idea of that getting rid of all those FBI agents, many of whom my rural districts rely on for their investigation because they have so few resources, that these kinds of cuts that we heard about tonight really are not based on performance of what's needed out in the field. They are just sort of dictated from above without any consideration of what's needed on the ground. That's how it looks like to us.
I can't get any information from the administration about it. Nobody in Congress seemed to know anything about it. Even our Republican colleagues didn't know anything about it. The administration won't own up to it. And there appeared to be one employee in DOGE who was responsible for completely taking Elon Musk's chainsaw to 373 different grant programs against the United States of America, serving millions of people. Like that's
So he is not keeping us safe. He is actually making us less safe. And many of these programs, actually, as chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus, I'm very concerned about the cutting of the law enforcement programs that actually support women and children who've been subject to rape and abuse. And I have received calls after call when those cuts came through, and they are terrified about the additional cuts to the Department of Justice that they see coming down the line. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what does it mean to be a sheriff who has to respond to calls in, like some of my counties, like in Rio Riva County, I have sheriffs responding to an area that has 5,896 square miles. That's bigger than the entire state of Connecticut, and they have less than 24 police officers. They would not say that any federal funds would be duplicative. In fact, they are very grateful for the community funding I've brought to them. But they've also talked to me about the importance of what does it mean when you are out there responding to a car accidents, responding to victims of violent crime, and the ability to get them to an emergency room, to get them to health care. And what Republicans are doing just across the street here is they are gutting Medicaid as we sit here. They are sitting in a committee room and they are gutting Medicaid. And when they do that over $700 billion worth of cuts to Medicaid, what they're going to be doing is actually gutting the ability of my sheriffs to take somebody to an emergency room in a rural community, to take them to a tribally operated health clinic, because Medicaid is at the basis of keeping those operations functioning. And I think that that's an important piece, that we can't just sit here on some of these bills that don't connect with, we don't think about what is it like to actually serve in rural communities, to provide law enforcement in rural communities. You need to be able to have an emergency room, have a health clinic to take these victims to, whether it be a car accident or not. Madam Chair, I'd like to seek unanimous consent to enter into the record an article titled Medicaid Cuts Would Threaten Rural Hospitals. The article notes that 190 rural hospitals in 34 Medicaid expansion states are at immediate risk of closure. Slashing Medicaid would put them over the edge.
Without objection, and this is a hypothetical article, of course, but we'll take it into the record.
Right. It is based on a lot of research, which I think this is really an important piece, is when you base what you're doing on data and research and analysis rather than a chainsaw, right? In North Carolina, there are actually 7 rural hospitals that are potential at risk. So, that's just, I think, how all of this sits. But, I know that you had wanted to respond to some other things. I'm the last Democrat when we go down the line here, so this is your chance to respond to any of these.
No, thank you, Congresswoman Leisure Fernandez.
She was talking to me.
So I was looking at me. So, look, we've got the list of programs that were deleted and dismembered by this DOGE employee. A lot of them do relate to sexual assault and rape assistance to victims in different parts of the country. But look, our federalism is a delicate network of different programs. It's the people on the ground who know best what are the problems taking place in a particular community in New Mexico or Pennsylvania or North Carolina or Massachusetts. And that's why we have the federal money that can flow to them. And suddenly, one person just deleted all of it. And now that hundreds of millions of dollars have been cut off to those programs. And, you know, I think it is a bit of an insult for my colleague to say there's only one crime that Democrats care about. First of all, it was hundreds of crimes that took place. It was more than 1,000 crimes that took place on January 6th. And forgive us if we're a little sensitive about it, but we were here and people died that day. But in any event, it's an insult to Democratic district attorneys across the country, Democratic sheriffs, Democratic cops, Democratic victims of crime, because we are equally invested, my friend Mr. Knott, as you are in stopping violent crime in America. And to my friend Mr. Norman, if you think that there's some case where there was any Democrat that incited someone to violence in attacking a police officer in the summer of 2020, please bring it forward and tell us about it, because we will denounce those people, just like we've denounced President Trump, and I hope you would, for inciting a violent insurrection against the police here. And please show me the Democratic governor who's pardoned one person who attacked a police officer in the summer of 2020. I would love to see it. Well, we just saw the pardon of more than 1,500 people, hundreds of whom violently attacked our police officers. So I reject the analogy, my friend Mr. Norman. Thank you for the opportunity to respond.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to that supporting law enforcement means voting for funding and respecting their work and their sacrifice. So supporting law enforcement means condemning Trump's pardoning of the violent offenders. Supporting law enforcement means condemning Trump when he cuts the funding for law enforcement. It means all of those things. And I'm really proud of my Democratic colleagues and those few Republicans who've also done those things. And with that, Madam Chair, I will yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. And I'll resist the urge. Mr. Jack, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I just want to first and foremost commend my colleague in the freshman class, Mr. Knott. I hope, thank you, Mr. Raskin, he's already distinguished himself as an effective member of your committee. And at the same time, too, want to thank you for your service to our country as an assistant U.S. prosecutor. And the only question I have, and I'm just curious, I know there has been some conversation about some of the weapons that law enforcement officers can purchase from the government. Without that potential, what would happen to those weapons after they're eventually out of service?
It's a great question. Thank you, Mr. Jack. But essentially, there's a process by law where those firearms are aggregated and then systematically destroyed with a certain witness threshold. And so they're rendered useless. They're not recirculated. The officers have no optionality there. They are taken by the agency and destroyed physically, so they are no longer operable. The only thing they can be used for in the future is recycled metal scrap, essentially.
Got it.
Yes, sir.
Well, every other question I had, Madam Chair, has already come up. So with that, I yield back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no members having any further questions for our witnesses here on this first panel, we thank you again. And Mr. Rathkin, I want to say to you, as you know, how I feel about you personally for your loss also. Thank you.
May I say for the record that Mr. Raskin has been nothing but cordial to me on the Judiciary Committee. As a new member, he's been very, very nice. I appreciate it.
Certainly.
Yep.
Thank you.
And I should say for the record, Mr. Knott's a pretty good guy, too. So,
We've got to be careful about these positive things. Thank you both very much. Ms. Gillen. Ms. Gillen, you're recognized, and as I said earlier, any prepared testimony that you have will be entered into the record, but we welcome your testimony.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member McGovern. I'm grateful for the opportunity to appear before you all today in support of my amendment to H.R. 2240, the Improving Law Enforcement Officer Safety and Wellness Through Data Act. Let me start by saying I'm grateful to my colleagues for advancing this important bipartisan legislation through the Judiciary Committee, and I strongly support the bill, and I appreciate the Rules Committee and all the members here for letting members like me offer constructive amendments. Madam Chair, each and every day, our brave law enforcement officers in my district in Nassau County on Long Island and across our country put their lives on the line to protect and serve our communities. We all have a responsibility to do everything we can to support them so they can do their job safely and effectively, and also they deserve support and access to resources when they need to be safe and healthy when they return home to their loved ones. I'm here today to lend my voice to a very important issue, which is the issue of mental health for our law enforcement officers. This issue deeply affects my community in Nassau County, where this year we have tragically lost 2 of our own Nassau County police officers to suicide. In fact, my first district period, I had to go and attend the funeral for a young police officer who lived in a neighboring town who committed suicide. It's hard to describe the pain and the impact that the loss of these officers has on their family and on our communities. And in recent weeks, I've had the opportunity to talk with some of my colleagues as well as leaders in the law enforcement industry. And even on the way over here, I was walking with some lieutenants from the Port Authority Police of New York. We were talking about the mental health issue. And they were saying how in law enforcement, there's this feeling where you have to be the strong guy, the tough guy, or the tough woman. And sometimes it's hard to reach out for the help that you need. So I'd like to recognize Tommy Shevlin, who's the president of the Nassau County PBA. And he's been a real leader on this issue and addressing the stigma that sometimes people in law enforcement feel with seeking the help that they need. And he's been advocating for legislation at the state level to encourage peer-to-peer counseling for law officers to meet this need. And in that spirit, I offered the amendment to the mental health and wellness reporting requirement under Section 5 of the bill. And what my amendment does is simply ensure that the Attorney General's report to Congress will include information on effective strategies to help reduce stigma and encourage officers to access the mental health screening, peer-to-peer counseling, and the help that they need that can help them deal with tough situations. We just need to send a clear message, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, that if you're a police officer who's dealing with a tough situation, it's okay to talk about it and to ask for help. Sometimes that's the thing that can make the difference, breaking down barriers and ultimately saving lives. So if there are best practices and programs that have proven effective in certain law enforcement communities, it's great if we can know about them and we can deploy them in law enforcement communities across the country. So I urge support for my amendment. I look forward to working together with each and every one of you and our colleagues to do everything we can to support our police officers and our first responders who make such extraordinary sacrifices every day to protect us. Thank you, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gillen. I have no questions. Mr. Scott, do you have any questions? Mr. McGovern.
I want to thank you for your excellent testimony. This is an important subject, and I support making your amendment in order.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Mr. Jack, do you have any questions? Okay, thank you. Ms. Scanlon, no questions. Mr. Norman, no. Ms. Leisure Fernandez. Thank you. And Mr. Roy. Thank you. Ms. Gillen, we thank you very much for coming and invite you back again. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I move the committee grant closed rules for H.R. 2240, the Improving Law Enforcement Officer Safety and Wellness Through Data Act, H.R. 2243, Leosa Reform Act, and H.R. 2255, the Federal Law Enforcement Officer Service Weapon Purchase Act of 2025. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of each bill. The rule provides that the respective amendments in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary now printed in each bill shall be considered as adopted, and each bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in each bill as amended. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate on each bill, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary, their respective designees. Finally, the rule provides each bill 1 motion to recommit.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion. Is there any discussion or amendment to the rule? Mr. McGovern, you're
Yeah,
recognized.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 1 to H.R. 2240, offered by Representative Gillen, which adds reporting on effective strategies to reduce stigma and encourage law enforcement officers to access mental health screening and peer-to-peer counseling. As we just heard from her testimony, being part of law enforcement can be quite stressful. I'm a little bit puzzled because I would like to think this is something we all agree on, what this amendment would call for, and it's certainly germane to the legislation. And so I'm just trying to figure out why wasn't it made an order? Yeah, because it is germane.
Suspend.
Just a moment.
I was asking a question of the chair. I'm going to ask for a vote on this, but this was a germane amendment, and I'm just curious. This is totally appropriate the way she testified. This is a subject matter I think we all agree on. It's not, I'm just trying to understand what the rationale was for not making an order. You asked for amendments, and I think this is the only amendment that we have offered here, and it's germane.
We're happy to entertain debate on the issue, so if you'd like to say anything else on the amendment.
Then we should, then we can have debate on the floor.
Yes, sir.
So, all right, then I will ask for a roll call.
Thank you.
Could I speak to the amendment as well?
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead, Ms.
Okay,
Gaylor.
thank you. I spent a decade or more working with law enforcement officers, providing them with free estate planning services through the Wills for Heroes Foundation. And what Representative Gillen just testified to is very true, that the stigma associated with asking for help among law enforcement, it prevents them from getting mental health assistance. It prevents them from actually getting wills, which their families need if the worst does happen. So it's a very real issue, and the type of support that she's proposed here would actually be a real service. So since it is a germane amendment, I would recommend that we include it.
And I would just urge that if you guys don't know why you're blocking it, why don't you vote for it? I yield back.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair,